Hey everybody, welcome to this year's 2019 Back to School Tech presentation or talk that we have. And my name's Darren, and I'm with a family company. We are called Personal Protection Systems. We're better known as the White Hatters. And we travel internationally speaking to teens from across Canada and the United States in the areas of social media safety and digital literacy. And again, today's show is all about back to school and technology and parents and what's going on. And to help us in today's show, we have surrounded ourselves with 5 other experts in the field from across Canada. Because what's really cool about the show today is that we are all Canadian. I mean, how cool is that, right? We're all Canadian, which is kind of cool. So I've got teachers, I've got social media software developers, I've got a social media marketing specialist, I've got an online privacy guru, and we're all parents, and we also all have a love for this thing called social media and technology, which is kind of cool. So by way of our introduction, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the east coast of Canada, and I'm going to ask each person as I pop you up on the screen here, maybe to share with everybody who you are, what you love doing. So I'm going to start on the east coast of Canada. By the way, Matthew, did the hurricane affect any of you guys at all in Ottawa? Any remnants of it at all?
No, we haven't. Maybe a few strong winds, but I don't think you can really pin that on Dorian.
So how about if you introduce everybody who's watching?
So my name is Mathew Johnson. I'm the Director of Education for Media Smarts, which is Canada's Centre for Digital and Media Literacy. We do research and provide lots of free resources for parents and teachers on media and digital literacy issues, all at our website, mediasmarts.ca.
Awesome. Great. I mean, I just love you guys. I love the information that you guys put out there. I love how you write it. You make it easy to understand for parents, adults, educators, even students and teens. So love having you on board, Matt. Looking forward to the discussion. So the next person I'd like to introduce to you is Nancy. Hey, Nancy, and we're connecting with you from Calgary. What's the weather like in Calgary today?
It's a little overcast, but yesterday was a beautiful sunny day, so awesome. I don't mind being inside today at all.
Awesome.
Nice to meet you.
Can you share who you are with everybody?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I'm a mom, and I kind of started on this journey because I am a social media marketer. I've been doing marketing using social media for the last 10 years, and I've worked with some pretty big brands like Travel Alberta. I currently lead all the social media for the city of Calgary, and I've worked with other brands like Sport Check and Samsung and even Las Vegas Tourism.
Awesome.
But what's interesting is I dabbled in this space because I was concerned that there was a lot of negative messages around using technology and social media. And in fact, I believe there to be a lot of positive use. So, I kind of started this journey. I have an active web page and Facebook page called Social Citizens, and I wrote a book to help parents kind of navigate this space too in a positive way.
Yeah, and for all our viewers, we're going to have links to everybody online. And what I really love about you, Nancy, is you kind of have the same philosophy as us when it comes to social media and teaching our kids. It's all about enlightening and not frightening, right? And that's really what it's all about, right? So the next guest that I like to introduce is Sandra. And Sandra is from British Columbia. Sandra,
I am.
How are you?
I'm good.
How's the weather?
Glad to be back. The weather's actually a little bit overcast, but it's beautiful. It's nice here in Smithers in northern BC. I'm a teacher. I teach grade 7, and I also have a bit of a district job where I'm an educational tech support teacher. So I'm helping teachers across the district use technology to allow access for all students in their classroom, to differentiate in their classroom, and to sort of navigate the technology integration in the classroom.
I love your message, right? I follow you all over the place. I mean, we've met personally as well. I love getting perspectives from teachers, right? And what's going on in the classroom. We've got some really good questions for you a little bit later that we're looking to share with the rest of the audience. Next person that I want to introduce is a good friend of ours. She's also on the White Hatter team, and it's Julia. Julia, how are you doing today?
Doing well. I'm out here in beautiful British Columbia as well.
By the way, Beth says hi. She's presently on a cruise ship right now, traveling to Alaska with a girlfriend of hers, so she says hi. But can you share with our viewers who we are? What do you do?
Sure. I'm, as you said, I'm consultant with the White Hatter Group. I'm also a professor up at Vancouver Island University, where I work with undergraduate students in teaching them how to incorporate technology in conscious and privacy protecting, privacy respecting ways. And I also work with graduate students in the online their online teaching and learning diploma program for people who are already in the field, already teaching. And there I teach a social media course, again, teaching them how to use it in conscious and privacy respecting ways. I've been a big advocate for privacy in the province and have traveled abroad to talk about ways that we can protect privacy and use all of these tools under BC's FIPA, which is one of the most restrictive privacy legislations in the province and most comparable to the European Union's GDPR requirements.
Awesome. Yeah, you're definitely one of my go-to peoples when it comes to privacy. A lot of things that people don't think about, especially educators in the classroom, using some of the apps that they're using, and some of the concerns around that. We're going to be, sharing some information and asking you some questions in that field. And the last person I'd like to introduce is Sean. And Sean, you're from Vancouver.
I sure am.
Why don't you share with everybody who you are? What do you do?
Absolutely. So, hi everybody. I am Sean Herman. Founder and CEO of a company called Kinzu. So I founded Kinzu about 1.5 years ago, and basically everything that we're trying to do is to make technology a more positive force in the life of families. So our first product is a messenger for the entire family, including kids as young as 6, but basically a way to connect children with parents and grandparents and uncles and aunties in a very safe, private, managed way. And in addition to that, I've written a book which looks at persuasive technology, kind of the motives of big tech to keep us hooked on their platforms, and then kind of compare that to the recent trend that children are getting on technology younger and younger. So that book is coming out September 24th, called Screen Captured, and really excited for it.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get a preview of it, to read it, and I really love how the book is written and how it really delves into how all these big players within the field are harvesting our information and using it to our advantage, and why we as parents need to really be alive to this issue, right? Because too many parents think it's all about sexual predation and all these bad things. Well, in fact, there's some issues surrounding privacy that Julia's going to talk about as well, that you really delve into really nice within your book. So welcome to my panel. As everybody can see, we love surrounding ourselves with others in the field, especially from across our country, that have an expertise. And I think each one of them brings their own lens to this thing called social media safety and digital literacy, which is really cool. So how this is going to work, the format is I'm going to moderate the discussion and direct questions to specific panel members. And then after we have a short discussion between myself and the individual panel member, I'm going to open it up to the rest of the panel on their thoughts. So when I do that, if you have a thought for the panel, just put up your hand so I can be able to see it, and then I'll be able to zoom into you using the technology that we're having. Now, what's really cool about what we're doing today, it's YouTube Live, right? It's all about you. So those people who are watching us right now on YouTube, there's a variety of different ways that you can connect with us to ask us questions that I can pose to our panelists, which is really cool, because remember, it's called YouTube for a reason. It's all about you, right? Helping us to get this thing going in a really, really cool way. So again, I'm going to pose those questions, and I'll even ask questions from our audience who decide to send me questions. So what we're going to do here is my first question is actually going to go to Sandra. So I'm going to ask Sandra this question. Sandra, you know what? It's clear to me that this school year, one of the biggest debates we're seeing is, should we allow phones in the classroom? In fact, if you look at the screen, there's an article just came out nationally about a school, I think it was in Quebec, that has decided to ban all use of technology, including cell phones, within the school. And this is also happening in other school districts here in British Columbia, most of the provinces across Canada. So I'm wondering, as an educator, which you are, what are some of your thoughts now specifically on this issue about banning devices like cell phones at all times in classes?
So like in a nutshell, I disagree. However, I do feel as an educator and thinking in the big picture, I do think that we as teachers are really in a complex situation because we're trying to navigate devices that are coming from home, the messages that are being sent from home, messages that kids get from each other, from social media, and then the messages that they get from the public and from each other, from their peers. I feel like there's been a lot of change really, really fast. I've been teaching for about 20 years, and I can say that probably the technology in the last, I would even say like 5 years, and the amount of students, the number of students in my own classroom, grade 7, that I get to stand up at the beginning of the year and I ask them, how many of you have a personal device? That just increases every year, and the age seems to get younger and younger when they get devices. So I do feel like, I'm pretty proud to be a teacher in British Columbia. I don't know if right now I could be a teacher in Ontario, to be honest. I couldn't, or in France, I couldn't be somewhere where cell phones are banned. But I do feel for teachers because it is a very delicate situation. It's kind of a fine balance. I feel our job is to really educate kids, and our job is to help them be really good digital citizens. And that includes digital literacy, safety, their health, digital health. And I would say that just like we do with some of our mental health issues that we have in schools, and just sort of like, we call it self-regulation and just kids being able to be social at school. There's a lot on our plates, and so we really need the help of parents. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes parents don't model the best digital health either. We can all think of examples of that. And so I actually don't find it a big deal in my classroom. And there's many ways that, the first day of school last week, I just said, if you have a phone, I want to see it out. Just put it on your desk. That's where mine is. You're going to see mine. And this is when it's an appropriate use to use it for school. We're using technology for something that we're doing in the classroom. However, if you don't have a device, you don't need one. So you're not running home and telling your parents, Mrs. McAulay asked me for a cell phone. Absolutely not. And we do need to still teach kids face-to-face communication skills. We absolutely have to teach them how to use it as a tool. And I really believe that we can use social media in all ways, shapes, and form for students and kids to make positive change. And I really do believe that it is a powerful tool that's not going away. And it's our job as parents and as educators to teach them how they can use it responsibly, respectfully. It's not okay to send your snaps in the middle of math class. We have to talk about pictures. We have to talk about answering, the phone at certain times and at a restaurant. But we can't expect kids to make adult decisions when they're still children. And that frontal lobe hasn't been developed or doesn't develop until sometimes mid-20s. And so I also don't think we can put a really powerful tool in kids' hands without the education. And as I said, it's really complex. I support my colleagues in high school who have a basket at the door, who just say, it's not going to work, and please put them in the basket. You can pick them up on the way out. Or, Darren and Brandon, I saw your little charging station. Yeah. Also respect those teachers who are like, you know what? Leave it in your locker. It doesn't come to my classroom. I do think that there's a place for that. We do have a little restaurant here in town where we see a little sign that says, please refrain from using your cell phone while you're ordering at the counter. And I think those are all of those social innuendos and social sort of situations that we have to teach kids about. So
excellent. Just a couple of things before I open it to the panel. To be fair to the Ontario teachers, although there's this provincial policy in place, it has given freedom to the teachers to allow students to use those devices in class for the purposes of education, but it's at the teacher's discretion, right? I also think that what is lacking in a lot of schools, at least what I've seen, is not a lot of policy direction on this. So everybody seems to be doing different things, right? And you would think, one of the things that I find is that kids want boundaries, and so if we have those boundaries in place and they're clearly articulated, that is important. And the other thing, not only do parents need to be good role models, but I also think that educators need to be good. Like, one of the things I've heard from kids is, here they are, teachers telling us not to use our phones, but our teachers at the front of the class buying stuff off of Used by Victoria and stuff, right?
So if I'll respond to that, I think that I would say in my experience with my colleagues in Smithers, and I actually do workshops across the province, and I have taught on Vancouver Island for 10 years, and I still am quite connected to those colleagues I've taught with there. I would say that those situations are pretty few and far between. Most educators that I know are not purchasing things on Amazon during class time. However, I agree with that. I also think that what was your second point that you said?
With respect to, some policy and some guidelines so that things are clear, right?
Yeah, and I think districts are working really fast and furious on that, and they are, from my experience, most things, especially in the Bulkley Valley, are really left up to the teachers in the classroom and the school to decide. Like our school, I think, has a great policy. We're elementary school. We don't want to see phones outside. When you're outside, you're playing in the snow, you're visiting, you're on the swings, you're blah, blah, blah. We're not taking photos, and it's up to the teacher's discretion in the classroom. So I have not seen it where there isn't really some guidelines. Most schools have to do something. It becomes a conversation because it comes to the staff room as like, what's going on with these cell phones, and we want to just ban them, or we're going to cut the Wi-Fi off. Those kind.
Excellent. Julia, I see that you wanted to pop in on a couple of comments here. By all means, what do you think, Julia?
Yeah, I just had a couple of comments. So this kind of follows on the French ban. The French came out with a ban, and it was the same kind of thing. It was used to create some media frenzy to talk about banning phones when in reality phones were able to be used at teachers' discretion and for educational purposes. So when you read deeper into it, it really wasn't a ban. And for me, who I teach teachers, so I look at this as a classroom management policy issue that needs to be clear to the students and the teachers in terms of the expectations. I was talking with a friend recently who couldn't believe when I pointed out to her that I have to go out and buy a graphing calculator for my kid when there's a free one on the phone. And she said to me, well, why can't you use the free one on the phone? And I said, because they're not allowed to use the phone in class. And so sometimes these bans have the effect of, enforcing added costs to families who've already paid for a phone for the kid. And just one more point that we have to keep in mind is that teachers are generally given professional autonomy in their classrooms. So that makes it difficult to do these big sweeping, everybody should be able to use it, or, ban it for everybody. So that makes it a complex environment to create these policies and enforce them.
Excellent. Is there anybody else on the panel that likes to add something? Just throw your hand up. Matthew, I see that you have your hand up here. Let's have a look at Matt. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I agree with pretty much everything that's been said. I think that it does make sense for teachers to have the discretion, because we have to remember what an incredible tool that personal devices can be. I grew up with an Apple II. And it's astonishing to me how powerful these devices are that we carry in our pockets all the time. And so we need to be teaching kids how to use these effectively, how to use these tools for more than just, Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok. And of course, they are going to go on, once they're outside of school, they're going to go on to have these devices with them. So that digital distraction is something that they're going to need to learn how to deal with before they enter the job force. And because once you're in the job, it's up to you to keep your phone in your pocket when it's appropriate, or to use it in an appropriate way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes addressing equity issues that come up when there isn't necessarily a school computer available for every student.
I agree 100%. And you know, the other interesting thing that I see going on with this is here we are talking about banning from because of distraction cell phones, but what about computers that are in the, you know, bring your own computer into the, you know, and iPads. There's all kinds of other issues there. But I truly do, I really loved your comment about having to educate teachers on this issue as well, right? And I think a part of that can also be bringing kids into the equation. I mean, I think our kids and our teens have so much to offer as well, and too often we adults think that because we're the adults we know best. Well, how about asking the kids to join in on this conversation and asking them, what do they think? Because I think it might surprise us about what they may come up with respect to minimizing use of these devices in the classroom as well. Great discussion. We got a lot of questions that we're going to ask the entire group, so I want to move on. So this next question is going to actually be for Mathew. And Mathew, you know, another topic of heavy conversation right now is everything to do with screen time, right? And this whole thing to do with screen time that's going on right now. In fact, here's a really good example of what I mean here. This was out there that half of Canadian parents are concerned over their kids' screen time and the use of screen time right now. So, what are your thoughts, Matt, on this concern from a researching standpoint and as a social media safety and digital literacy advocate?
Yeah, well, we actually were involved in the Canadian Pediatric Society statements on screen time and children. So this is something that we've put a lot of time and effort into. And really what it comes down to is that for kids over age 2, you can't really talk about screen time as a single thing. So under the age of 2, because kids' brains are doing such crucial development, there really are no positive screen activities. The one exception is video chatting with someone that the child knows in real life. But aside from that, there's no benefit to screen activities under the age of 2 because kids who are that young, they need personal interaction. They need to be exploring the world around them physically. They need sensory stimulation, and they don't get any of those things from screens. But after that age, then we have to start distinguishing between different screen activities. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not possible to spend too much time doing anything really positive, even something really positive. Too much of it can be a bad thing. But what becomes more important as kids getting older is distinguishing between the activities that are positive, that are creative, that are educational, that are social in a positive way, meaningfully social, and then activities that are either less positive but harmless, you know, many kinds of entertainment like video games or watching appropriate kids programming, and then finally activities which we might say are inappropriate or possibly harmful. So inappropriate content, maybe some types of interactions with other people, and anything that has, you might say, a habit-forming element. And we do know that certain types of social media and video games are designed to be essentially habit-forming. In fact, most of the platforms that we use, everything from YouTube to Facebook to Snapchat to whatever video game you like, they have been designed to some extent to make us spend more time on them. So that's the long answer. The short answer is that as kids get older, we have to move more from managing their screen time for them to helping them learn to manage their own screen time. Part of that is making sure that we provide them with lots of non-screen activities, because there's no point in just saying turn off the screens if you're not providing an alternative. But the other is helping them to understand some things are better than others. And, you know, if a kid is learning how to do computer coding, if they're learning how to do animation, if they're doing creative things, then to a fair extent, we're going to want to encourage that. Although, as with any hobby, there can be too much of it, and we need to watch out for that.
So just to build into that, just before I open it up to the panel, one of the things I say is as kids get older, it's not about how much time they're spending online, it's what they're doing with that time online. In other words, are they just being consumers where they're treating social media like bubble gum for the brain, or are they using social media to become producers, creators, to create connections? So it's not necessarily how much time, it's what they're doing with the time. What do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely true. It becomes more challenging as kids get into their teens when they're doing things like using social media, where, in some cases they may be using social media just to fill time, or they may be using it for because they feel they have to. And there are other times where they may be turning to social media to get emotional support, where it may have a really positive effect on them.
Yep.
And that's why our bottom line about every kind of media that your kids use is that you need to talk to them about it. That their media lives, whether it's traditional media, digital media, whatever, it has to be a part of the conversations you have with your kids. In the same way that you want to know what happened to them at school today, what happened in class, what happened in the schoolyard, are you getting along with people? Are you having problems with some of your friends? We have to have these same conversations about media, because media has just as big an impact on their lives.
And in fact, the research shows us that parents who get involved through parental communication and participation, those kids are far less likely to get involved in less than desirable behavior.
Yeah, it really is the number one protective effect. Protective factor is having parents who are involved.
Absolutely.
And who set limits when appropriate, but also listen and give their kids a chance to earn responsibility and independence.
Sean, I see that you had your hand up about wanting to add something to the discussion, which is kind of cool because you come from a social media developing or vendor platform, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just correct you, I have to, because messaging platform, we're a little sensitive about that. But what we're building out is a private messaging platform, and we're very careful at the younger ages to not intermingle that with social media.
Right.
So, but what I wanted to say was, Matthew, I think I couldn't agree more. And I really like the way you answer that. So part of the motivation for me writing a book about this was when I went to conferences and when I went to speak to educators and parents, early on, I was getting the question a lot, how much screen time is the right amount? And as I had more time to kind of think and ideate and research on it, the conclusion I kind of came to was basically what you said, is it depends less on the time limits. I talk about this in my book, and I say, something magical doesn't happen in the child's brain at 30 minutes or 60 minutes or one of these time limits that always ends on an hour, right? So they're rather arbitrary. And in our household, we definitely have limits, but the limits are about the amount of time that we feel my daughter is getting a good balance of activities, which you spoke about. So to me, what they're doing on the screens is 100% more important. And my book is called Screen Captured because what I end up doing is kind of dividing screen time into what I call positive screen time, which touches on a lot of the things that you talk about, and then screen captured, which is when we're being kind of manipulated by big media, big platforms to stay on the platform, where children are chasing likes on social media and followers from people that they don't know and comparing themselves to others and getting social validation that way. So I just wanted to kind of carry on to the question, or your answer. I think you answered it very, very well. And I look at my daughter, she spends a lot of time reading on the screen. So she's read over 1,100 books on a great app called Epic. And to me, if I look at that versus, if she was on Facebook or Instagram kind of chasing likes, very, very different. So I just think that's a very important distinction to make. And I think the positive thing is, I think the narrative is starting to change, and I'm hearing less from parents how much screen time and starting to see more of this focus on, okay, what they do, and it's quality over quantity. And I think people are starting to get that a little bit more.
Awesome. Great topic. Some really great comments going around. And by the way, Sean, people who are following us, they love your background. They love the background of what in your shot right now. So, and just as a reminder for those of who just joined us, there's a variety of different ways that you can pose questions that I can pose to any of these experts that are on the panel here. Variety of different ways. You can send us a question on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Send it our way, and we will be able to pose those questions to the panel that we have in front of us. So the next question, moving along here, is for Julia. And Julia, the Australian E-Safety Commissioner just recently put out a warning, and here it is right here. And it was specifically talking about significant privacy issues surrounding the Google Education Suite that is very popular with schools in their country. But I would argue with you, it's probably just an issue here in Canada, if not everywhere else around the world. So Julia, I'm just wondering, why is it important for parents and educators to understand some of the concerns surrounding these platforms that schools may be using specific to their child's privacy?
Okay, I'll start out with a disclaimer. I am not an absolutely huge fan of G Suite because of the many ways that it can collect data, which brings me to the first point that often parents and others don't understand. A writer wrote a few years ago that data is the new oil. It's the new currency. And this is what the information economy is running on. So the more personal, the more behavior monetize it, either is to sell ads or actually selling the data in parts or whole to data brokers who then use the information outside. Now, G Suite recently changed. It has what's called the legacy suite, which was the free suite that everybody could jump onto a number of years ago, and now it has a G Suite Enterprise for Education that right now school districts around the world are able all their faculty and staff to join at a reduced rate of $2 a user, and then all of their students get on for free temporarily. But this price can be ramped up at any time, and the numbers I've seen are $4 for every user, faculty and student, but that's coming. So let me just work with the legacy that most school districts probably are using in Canada. So we need to understand, parents need to understand in Canada that you have a right to protect your personal information under the charter. But that only protects your rights within Canada. So as soon as information is stored, transmitted, or even just accessible outside of Canada, and it's personal information, in BC in particular, but we're seeing increasing interest across Canada to adopt this type of standard. If your personal information is being transferred, stored, or accessed outside of Canada, you have a right to know that, and you have a right to say no. Now, that's specifically in BC, but we are seeing that this is increasingly being adopted across Canada, or being looked at as being adopted. And so for Google, what this means is that they have data storage centers. So at any given time, when a school district signs a G Suite license, it's allowing, first of all, G Suite downloads the responsibility for getting consent from parents under these Canadian privacy laws, downloads that responsibility to the school district. And the school district should be letting the parents know what personal information is being collected, why it's necessary to be collected. And in BC, our commissioner says that it needs to be what's minimally necessary to meet that rationale, that need for the information, and where that information is being going, how long it's going to be sold. Not sold. How long it's going to be stored or used, and then how you can say no. You can say no at some point. And the reason I have issues is since it's groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation have called Google to task. In 2015, Google said it wasn't targeting student data or student information for advertising purposes, and the EFF found that indeed it was tracking students outside. And then in 2018 in Missouri, some parents and a teacher found that the Google Drive was storing from the school was actually storing personal information for other accounts that these people were using outside of G Suite. So I have a lot of concerns, but a lot of it comes down to the training of G Suite administrators in a district. And for example, in the back end, right now, I think there's about 13 core services in G Suite, which are covered by the license, but there's about another 49 additional ones that include YouTube and Google Maps and Google Earth, which are outside that license. They're not protected. And if a school is using those, they need to treat those differently than the core apps that are under the license.
I would like to bounce this over to Sandra from a teacher's perspective, right? I mean, because again, you're the one in the classroom. What do you think about what Julia just said there?
Well, I totally agree. And I know that there are quite a few districts in BC that are using Google Classroom and Google apps in their schools and in their district, and they get permission. I can say here in the Bulkley Valley, we have decided on Microsoft and Office 365. That just leaves us with everything being north of the so we don't even have to worry about those things. I think it also comes down to what Julia said before. It comes down to education and professional development of our teachers. I think Mathew mentioned that as well, because it is like changing so much. So a district and their teachers need support from their district and their tech support and whoever is in charge of those types of things within their district to make sure that the teachers understand what's happening and that they can't just like load an app, like even like Epic, on an iPad in their classroom and plug. So, Mathletics or any of those kind of apps that we need to do a little bit of research and make sure that that isn't something that's going to be gathering data and information and personal information for kids. And that comes down to support for those teachers in schools because as I would like to think, lots of my colleagues are really tech savvy. There's still lots of questions and they don't know where to go. So hopefully districts have that support system in place.
Oh, I have that resource and her name is Julia. Julia, you know what? I just read this. This just came in from a PhD candidate in Australia, and here's what they said, and I love it. I believe schools and school leadership could, as a priority, develop data stewardship strategies and awareness campaigns while the associated legislation and policies are being developed. The task of protecting children from harms associated with data collection is challenging. I love that phrase, develop a data stewardship strategy.
Well, we actually, what's kind of ironic is that in BC at the Ministry of Education, there is a very clear set of directives of what they can and cannot do with data, and they have to sign off on them. Now, that doesn't devolve down to the school district level, and I've questioned that, and the ministry has told me, well, the school districts are semi-autonomous bodies. So they have a right to handle their local business. But if we look at what the standards the ministry are being held to for data, and especially after losing a hard drive with so many millions of people's information on it, what the ministry is being held to, that should be the standard, in my opinion, with support, because the districts are just not up to that kind of level of cybersecurity and data stewardship yet. Some districts are doing better jobs than others. And the other issue I want to address is mobile apps. Mobile apps are horrendous in terms of data leakage. And in fact, they will threaten you. I think it's threatening when they say you may not get full featured services if you turn off these apps. Every parent, every school, every teacher should be saying, turn them off. Let's see if this does what we need it to do, and only absolutely need it for the functions we're after, which is no. So if you can avoid mobile apps at all, I would. And when you can't, somebody needs to do that due diligence before they're used with students.
You know what? What I love about this discussion is when parents think about safety in the digital world, they're thinking about predation and other crimes. They're not really thinking about privacy, right? And how important this thing called privacy is to us as our kids get older. And it needs to be a part of the digital literacy programs that we're teaching. And I know Media Smarts, Matthew, yeah, you deal with this as well. But the next question I have is actually for Nancy. And for Nancy, you know, one of the things that's going on right now is this thing, you know, we do a lot of parents' presentations, much like you do. And one of the things I'm hearing from parents is this thing called TikTok, right? And what's going on with TikTok and where is it and what's it do? I mean, here's a really good example. Ontario teens TikTok video is conquering the internet. It is so cool to see what some teens are doing with some of their apps right now. So what I'm wondering, Nancy, is what are the positives and negatives about this app or any other app that you think parents should really know about when it comes to this app?
Well, let me touch on a few things. So let me start by saying I used TikTok. My son is active on TikTok. And it was about 3 weeks ago that we went to a shopping mall in Calgary. And there were over 2,000 kids that showed up, all because a few TikTok creators here in Calgary said they were going to do a meetup. So to me, this is like the Snapchat that was 3 years ago or the Fortnite craze. It's what a lot of kids are wanting to use and talk about. But what is it and why is it cool is because you can watch, you can create, and you can share these little short videos that are usually set to music or like to popular sound bites. So it allows kids to be creative. It allows them to watch other kids be creative. And it's kind of addicting. Like, it's kind of cool that way. And I shouldn't have used the word addicting, but it is. Like, it's fun to watch. The numbers are staggering in terms of the usage, and it's globally used. And I think what's really important to point out, though, is so I think it's harmless. But what's really important is that parents know what this app is, like the truths of this app. So first and foremost, based on what Julia was just talking about, this app is based in China. So you should be very aware that anything that you're sharing in terms of your name or where you live or your age or anything like that is not being shared or stored on a Canadian server or if you're in the United States. In fact, a lot of Chinese people who live in Canada now use this as a messaging app because so many apps are not allowed in China. So not just kids are using it, adults are using it as a messaging app. Although I say it's mostly harmless, I do think it's really, really important that parents know how to manage the settings. And under the privacy settings, they actually have very clearly labeled a digital well-being tab where you can set up restrictions on the content that might not be suitable. So if you're concerned and you hear about content that's more adult-oriented or you don't like certain lyrics and songs, you can actually set that, and it can be password protected that the parents set, and it's valid for 30 days. You can also set screen time limits. So back to that, like, how much time are they spending? You know, if you agreed that 30 minutes is more than enough to be on TikTok, you can do that. But, you know, like I like to think that if we're creating videos, and I totally prescribe to what you said, is like I started it when it was actually called Musical.ly about 3 years ago with my son. And we had a ton of fun creating videos together. Now that he's 14, that's super unlikely he would ever want to do a duet or anything like that with me. But I do love watching the stuff that he and his friends put out for dancing and singing. And my mind is blown at the ability that they have, because we didn't have this growing up. And I think they gain confidence, they gain creative skills, and quite frankly, are having fun.
You know what's really cool? One of the things that we say is that it's not necessarily the app, it's how the kids are using the app. That's really, hold on. Peppa, what are you doing in this YouTube live event? And for those of you who follow TikTok, you know what just happened there, right? So I see that, Sean, you wanted to say something about this as well. What do you think?
Yeah, it was actually a follow-up question for Nancy. So TikTok, like most social apps, has the 13 plus rating. And why 13 plus is important is anything under the age of 13 is under the governance of Coppa in the US or GDPR in Europe. So it is an important threshold. That being said, my oldest child is 8 years old. So for me to keep her off of TikTok is very black and white. I think it's not for that young of an age, but I definitely admit that there's some gray, as children age and they get to 11, 12, 13 years old. And my daughter uses Roblox, which is supposed to be for 12 plus. So there's a reasonability factor built in. But I guess my question for you, just a follow up in terms of the 13 plus, could you just comment on that? And at what age do you think, A, I guess, are you seeing children really getting onto it in big numbers? And B, do you feel that there's kind of an appropriateness to an age for them getting onto that?
Great questions. Nancy, what do you think?
I do suggest that 13 is the best age because, number one, that's when it is legal, and parents should be involved otherwise. So I see a lot of kids, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, and they're on when they're 11 and 12. And that's when I would say it's likely because the parents have kind of dug their head in the sand and go, well, everybody else is doing it. Or like they're on that spectrum of like, they either know and they don't really care or somewhere in between. So be very, very cautious and be very aware of what you are allowing. And be involved. So when my son was, I guess he was 11 for Musical.ly, we had a joint account under a pseudonym and we created, and he could only post with my permission. So you can kind of do baby steps if you're comfortable and familiar with it. Select who's following and who you're following and watching videos of too. But being involved, and quite frankly, that's a lot of how I learn how to use these new channels.
It's a great point. And like I've said many times, it's not necessarily the app, it's what people are doing with inside the app. Having said that, I wrote a posting on this just recently where over the past 2 weeks now, I was contacted by 3 different parents of youth who were under the age of 13 who were using TikTok and were convinced by influencers who said, hey, listen, if you connect with us over on Omegle, you may be able to talk to us face to face. So kids being under the age of 13 wanting to talk to these very famous influencers to them, they hop over to Omegle, and within seconds they're seeing things that they shouldn't be seeing on Omegle because of the specific platform that Omegle's on. Now, I'm wondering from Matthew's perspective, from Media Smarts with respect to age appropriate and apps, what do you think?
Well, as with anything else, there's a lot of content on TikTok, but it's a harder thing to manage than some other apps. So on YouTube, for instance, obviously there's a lot of material on YouTube that's not appropriate for kids, but parents do have a lot of ability to manage what their kids see by subscribing to particular channels, by building playlists, and so on. What you really want to avoid on YouTube, and I'm going to get back to TikTok in a second, what you really want to avoid in YouTube is following the recommendations that YouTube's giving you, because that, of course, is how you wind up you start with actually watching genuine Peppa Pig episodes, and you wind up watching these off-brand, very disturbing ones because the YouTube algorithm can't tell the difference. The reason I'm mentioning that is because on TikTok, almost everything is algorithmic. Almost everything is delivered to you. And in fact, it's a mystery in a way, even among the people who are really, really popular producers of content on TikTok. It is a mystery to them how it is that certain videos and certain creators get recommended by the algorithm. So it is a sign that with something like TikTok, where you have a lot less control over what you see, kids do need to be at an age where they're able to deal with disturbing or inappropriate content if it comes up, because it's very, very hard to shield them from it. You can't really curate TikTok in the way that you can with something like YouTube, and of course something like Netflix, which comes to you largely pre-curated.
Awesome comments. And staying with Matt, just a great conversation. Nancy, I just want to go back to you. Anything else you want to say?
I think that if it's back to school and for my key message is don't be afraid. Oh, did I lose you?
No.
And yeah, don't be afraid. And if you attended today's session, this is a great first start. I think following the organizations or getting the books or following these people on Twitter is another great way to stay informed, because that's the other reality is this space is constantly changing. So to just stay current is it can be overwhelming, but it's not undoable. So follow the White Hatters and you'll always have great information.
You know, one of the other things that I wanted to share with everybody, it's all about engaging with the kids, right? Like I love to say this, everything that I share with people, I learned from Brandon, right? Brandon was my Jedi master. I was his digital Padawan. Right? I really was. And to this day, him and I fight back and forth now who the true digital master is. He is. It is simply amazing how much, if you interact with your child or with your student, if you're a teacher, how much you can learn. Like I was at one school where a teacher decided, you know what, I'm going to let our kids teach this part of this lesson plan using technology to do it. And the teacher stood back and was just amazed. I find that sometimes educators think, well, we know best, you're the kids, whereas the really good ones I find are the ones that kind of sit back and sometimes let the kids teach as well. And now, you know, the teacher becomes the student and the student becomes the teacher, which is kind of cool, right? Some really good comments. Next question is for Matthew. Matthew, you know what? In this world of disinformation and misinformation, I hate calling it fake news, right? Because every time I hear this word fake news, I think about this guy in the United States. I'm not going to mention his name, right? But it's either misinformation or disinformation, right? But it's so important that teens and even parents understand the importance of critical thinking, right? Recently, I became aware of a free resource, but to kind of put critical thinking in place and what Media Smarts is doing right now. Like I became aware of this resource that Media Smarts offers now specifically on helping people understand the reality check, right? Understanding how to separate the reality from misinformation and disinformation. So I'm just wondering, Matt, why is this so important right now? Because I think this has really become extremely important to help kids understand, even adults to be quite honest, what the difference is between disinformation, misinformation. Let's hear.
Well, really what's changed is that a generation ago, you know, when I was growing up, when most of us were growing up, the media came to us through gatekeepers. And now there were good and bad things about that. I think there have been some improvements with the gatekeepers being less important. But what it means is that we used to rely on newspapers, on TV news, on other news sources, because they were funneling the information that came to us. We relied on them to have fact-checked it. And we relied on them to correct mistakes when they were made. But now, most of us, we don't get the news all in one package. We don't get a newspaper and that's it. We don't watch one news show and that's it. We get news from a million different places, and a lot of times we don't know where it came from without a little bit of extra effort, because we get it through social media. And so I know, oh, okay, that came to me from my Uncle Bob, and I trust my Uncle Bob, so I'm going to believe it. But if I don't do a little bit of extra work, I don't know whether Uncle Bob got it from, you know, the Wall Street Journal or the Weekly World News.
Yeah.
You know? So we have to do that now. And that's what's changed. We have to, it's now the front line. What we used to call media literacy is the second line now.
Yeah.
You know, all of that, engaging with bias, engaging with, you know, what's the commercial imperative, all of those things, still super important, but that comes second now, because now we have to do for ourselves the job that those gatekeepers used to do. We have to take, and sometimes it's not usually more than a minute once you know how to do it, but you need to figure out, where did this actually come from? Forget about Uncle Bob. Where did Uncle Bob get it? Is that where it really originated, or were they sharing it from somewhere else? Track it to its source and then figure out, is this a reliable source? Did it come from the Wall Street Journal, or did it come from the Weekly World News? If it's a source we don't recognize, we need to do a quick check on Wikipedia, a Google search, see, is this something reliable? I always give the example of an Australian newspaper. If you heard of the Sydney Morning Herald, you'd have no way probably of knowing whether that's even exists. Is this a real newspaper? Is it something that someone just made up? If it is a real newspaper, is it the Australian version of the Globe and Mail, or is it the Australian version of, the National Enquirer? So you need to do a little bit of extra effort. And finally, we can use the tools that we have at our disposal to search multiple sources at the same time. So we can go to fact-checking sites like Snopes or CanFact or PolitiFact. Sorry, it's FactsCan, not CanFact. But go to these fact-checking sources and see if someone has already debunked something. And we can also use the News tab in Google Search, which is different from Google News. But do a Google search on a news story and go to the News tab, and that'll show you how many different news sources are covering something. So if you just want to know, did this really happen? Or is this thing really worth the attention that one news source is putting on it? You can do a search on the News tab and it'll show you, oh yeah, that actually happened. Or gee, only one news outlet is covering this. I'm going to wait and see before I share it. And that's the last point, is the other difference is that we are no longer the end of a chain. Media doesn't stop with us anymore. We are broadcasters now. We're redistributors of media. And so we have an ethical responsibility to our friends, to our relatives, to everybody, to only share things when we have personally confirmed through those steps that I was just talking about, that we've confirmed that they're reliable.
Great comments. And you know what, before I open it up to the other panel, a couple of things. I remember about a year ago, there was this article that hit the media in Canada. Prime Minister Trudeau is going to build a wall between Canada and the United States, and he was going to get Donald Trump to pay for the wall. And hundreds of people got online going, yeah, right on, cool. Can't wait. Fake news, right? Or misinformation, disinformation. The other thing too is I think that some of this misinformation and disinformation is all about clickbait to drive people to specific websites so that they get a monetary every time somebody clicks on it as well, right? There's an algorithm going on there with some companies as well using it to their advantage. And you're so right. There's so many tools online right now that we can use to help fact check. Like I just wrote an article, a blog post, helping those who are using social media to date, because we know about 40% of people now in North America are using social media to date, and the issues surround catfishing. So we actually prepared a document now based upon our open source intelligence training that we have to help individuals figure out, is this person actually who they say they are, or are they somebody else? But any other comments from anybody on the panel specifically on this this issue of disinformation, misinformation? If you do, put your hand up so I can see and I'll click into you. Oh, Sean, there you go. Let me click into you. Let me just find your button here. Oh, there you go. What are you thinking, Sean?
All right. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can.
Yeah. Okay. I had to switch headsets. My first one went. So I just wanted to point out a couple of stats that I came across that I think were really interesting. 41% of adults are now getting their news primarily from Facebook, 23% from YouTube. And especially on YouTube, we know kids are using it. So I think some of that is propagating down. So I like everything that Matt said. I think that there's tons of resources available. Just want to point out, I think that that's also a great opportunity for parents to do some shared screen time with their kids. One of the skills that I'm trying to really work on with my daughter is critical thinking around what she's seeing and reading online. So working with her, helping her Google things, helping her identify what are reliable and not reliable results and what she can look for. So I think that that's just something, a skill that I think a lot of parents should think about. And it also has the benefit of a great way that my daughter and I can spend some time on the screen together, which I think helps to reinforce some of the positive uses of technology as well.
Again, I heard a common theme there, parental participation and communication, right? Nancy, I see that you had your hand up. You wanted to say something on this?
And quite frankly, on Facebook, probably 3 times a week, I have to tell friends of like, you know what, that post about somebody scamming you or hoaxing you, all you have to do is use Snopes and here's the truth. Or Facebook will not start collecting your data and sharing all your photos as of midnight tonight. You know the ones that I'm talking about. We all have friends that are doing that. Just this morning, I had to show a friend that oh, who did they say? Some celebrity was dead. And I'm like, okay, so just use our common sense. So, and I guess that's just the digital literacy challenge that we have with this, new frontier of how, as Sean said, that we're collecting our news and what sources we're using. And the ones that are truly scary to me are the deep fake videos that I can't even tell if they're real or not. So
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. We actually spoke about we do a YouTube live event every Sunday, and Brandon actually brought up somebody used a voice deep fake now in order to convince their business partner to give them $250,000 or transfer like $100,000 plus dollars. And it was so good. Like he actually thought he was talking to his boss, right? So
Wow.
kind of interesting. Anybody else on the panel right now have any other comments specifically on this issue? If not, I mean, we're getting to the end, right? So, but before we go, for closing, we actually had a question from one of actually it looked like a teen, Rose. My younger cousin started high school this past week, and she says she will be careful with apps and internet. How can I make sure she is being safe? So actually, Nancy, I want to throw that one at you and see what you think, how you can answer Rose on that question. How can I make sure she's being safe when she's using apps and the internet?
Well, first of all, Rose, I think it's awesome that you are being that trusted adult. You don't have to be a mom or dad or anything. You can just be a good family friend because you obviously understand how social media works. So I would ask your younger cousin to follow them. And that way, doesn't mean that you have to like and comment every post, but that you're just kind of looking out for them. And I do that a lot for my friends' kids at school too. And every once in a while, if something was posted that just isn't quite right, or maybe they were too much information, you can coach them on this is why you shouldn't do that. So good job already, but maybe that's what I would do.
Sean, I think you said that you can help answer that question to a degree. What do you think?
I was I was asking a different question offline, but no problem. I'll take a crack. I think that Nancy, you touched on. I think that watching this, being involved is a great start. I think open communication, talking to people. There are more and more resources available all the time. So I think just continuing to educate yourself, speak with parents, speak with educators. And, I think that the vast majority of what is out there in terms of what's available on technology is positive. I think that the negatives obviously get a little more airtime. They usually get a little more click. So we hear a lot more about it. And I think that is just the reality. But I think it's just a matter of staying aware of what you're doing, using tech for the right reasons. And I think that tech can be an amazing tool to connect, to educate, to be creative, to have friendships, all these great things.
And you know what, Sean, I must apologize. You know what? I missed your question. Because we're going to go about 5 minutes over. Apologize, but I think people are loving it. So, Sean, here's the question that I wanted to pose to you. Kind of sticking with that privacy theme that we were talking to Julia about. A good example here on the slide where YouTube was just fined $170 million for covertly tracking and selling personal information to teens. We know that TikTok was fined $5.7 million. You know what? As a social media app developer who works on developing an app, and who's also written a book that talks about the issues in detail. What should why should this be a concern to parents? And again, I must apologize, it's a communication app, it's not a social media app.
No problem. So the fine that, I guess it was more of a settlement that YouTube reached with the FTC just happened earlier this week. So YouTube, of course, owned by Google. So the fine was for Coppa violations. So for those that aren't familiar, Coppa is the regulation administered by the FTC to make sure that big tech and big platforms aren't collecting privacy from children, and when they are, it's under certain rules that are very strict, which is a very good thing. So I think the worst kept secret in tech is kids are using YouTube and using it in huge numbers. The issue for me was YouTube is not Coppa compliant. So Kinzu, we're just getting started. We are Coppa compliant. So to me, it was really interesting. There's a lot more kids using YouTube than are using Kinzu, I can promise you. And it really bothered me that up to this point, YouTube could kind of skirt the rules and more or less kind of ignore the fact that kids are on the platform. And with kids on the platform, what that meant is YouTube was collecting data. Children could potentially connect with other people, created all sorts of issues that Coppa is supposed to look out for the interests of kids. So where I think the concern is the fact is no fine or any fine was likely to not be large enough. So $170 million, that's about 37 hours worth of profit for Google. So it's not going to be enough to deter. But I was actually at a conference, a KidSafe conference, who looks after the FTC and makes sure that we're Coppa compliant just last week. And somebody from the FTC was there, and they couldn't speak specifically about YouTube because the settlement hadn't been reached. But what was interesting is they said, don't hone in on the fine alone. The fine is one aspect of it, but that's not going to be the deterrence. What also happens that we don't necessarily see is that the FTC now works with these platforms to make changes and make changes that are positive. So I'm going to be optimistic and hope that we start to see things in place. And over the past few weeks, anybody that's been paying attention, you're starting to see some changes at YouTube. So they're going away from behavioral advertising to children, and that meaning advertising that's driven by algorithms, which means data tracking and data capture. They've turned off some chat features under videos that allow any users, but especially children, to connect with people underneath a video and kind of have a chat about it. They've disabled comments from videos that feature children. And then they're taking YouTube Kids to a web platform. So these are all things that have happened over the past few weeks, and I think that's been in conjunction with the FTC. So I'm going to be optimistic, and I'm going to be watching very closely. I think the fine alone wasn't enough to get it done, and that's not going to stop YouTube. The fact is they get a tremendous amount of value from users being on the platform, and especially children. So it's going to be interesting to watch the balance, but I think we're going to see more of a movement towards YouTube Kids, which I think they're going to open up to be a platform beyond kind of the pre-K that it really attracts to today. And we're going to see some broader changes, but we're going to be watching that very closely.
It's too bad it's taken them this long, right? Like, they've known this for a while. But Julia, I know that you wanted to, on this kind of, because this is your area of expertise. Your comments?
Yeah, I think the FTC has been pretty, and it's only tightened up its belts. The EU has really cracked down and has put some big fines in. And then the Americans are sitting there saying, what's happening with us? The EU, is fining Google and fining Facebook these huge fines. And that only came in, May 2018. But one of the things that concerns me, and I did ask my legal colleagues down in, when I was at George Washington State University, Daniel Soliv runs a privacy symposium down there. This money, now, I think the FTC is interested now because they can get this money, and that money is not going back towards children's programs. It's going into general coffers for the FTC. So I think we really need to see that we can pressure these organizations. They're outside of Canada. We cannot rely on Coppa and FERPA rules for us because we have no standing with them, and parents should not read those as any type of assurance. But if we can press the FTC to take this money and put it into educational programming or support for vendors getting up to speed to protect children, I think it would go a lot further.
Sean?
I completely agree with most of that. The one of the things that was established was $100 million fund for programming specific to children. That was part of the settlement. So again, it's this thing. I think it's unrealistic to expect that kids are not going to use YouTube. My daughter uses it, so I definitely can't cast too many stones. But what I also think is important is, and I talk about this in the book, is the motivations for big tech just aren't there to keep kids safe, right? So regulators, to your point, haven't stepped up enough. I think that this is a landmark fine. It's not nearly enough, but we're not going to see behaviors change as a result, I think, of this fine. Regulators need to step up. I would love to see advertisers that advertise to children on YouTube. In the past, there's many examples of them actually causing change at YouTube threatening to pull their ad dollars out if kids weren't kept safer. But I think today, the reality is it's really up to, I think, mostly us as parents to, if we're going to let our kids onto this platform, which is free, which means the person using it is the product, to be aware of what's going on, what kind of data is being tracked. And there are things that you can do as a parent to keep it safe. And Matt talked about this earlier, like recommended videos and autoplay, like turn those off. Don't let your kids go down the rabbit hole, because that's where things can start to get really dangerous. And so it's going to be interesting to see over the next, 6 to 12 months, what kind of changes there are. Are kids going to be off of YouTube in that time? I don't think so, not nearly. But I'm hoping what we're going to see is the FTC start to make some changes in addition to the fine, that we start to see kind of trickle down and do hopefully start to see YouTube become a little bit safer for kids.
You know what? I heard another theme there. Parent involvement, once again, right? What Matthew was talking about. You know what? One of the things, we're a little over, so I want to kind of move to the closing, where I want to give everybody the ability just to end with what their thoughts are, with parents and social media in this school year, and just sharing your kind of final thoughts. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to work from the West Coast, and I'm going to go to the East Coast. So the first person I'm going to turn to is Julia. Julia, what are some of your final thoughts to parents or educators who may be watching?
I want them to understand that individuals have a charter right to privacy, and that's where we start from. And that when schools in particular, teachers in schools, take children into these environments, they have a fiduciary responsibility, which is moral and ethical and legal, to protect the rights of students and parents in these environments, especially when they're advocating or asking for specific types of technology to be used. So I don't think parents or guardians or students should be afraid to push back and ask questions about why do you need this information? Where is it going? Is it going to be outside of Canada? And if you're not comfortable with that, ask for an alternative. There are other things that can be done, and that should be open to every student. And especially the other thing I think is misleading. Quite often you'll hear schools talk about using servers in Canada, which is all well and good when all the users are in Canada. But the minute a parent or a teacher or faculty member crosses a border and begins accessing those services in Canada, they've exposed data. And so schools should be asking or telling parents or guardians or faculty and staff not to be using these services with personal information outside of Canada, unless there's an emergency situation. That should be avoided.
Awesome. Nancy let's go to Sandra from Central BC. Your final thoughts as an educator.
I think the main thing I would like to say probably is more of as a parent than as a teacher, because I am a parent of kids that are 13 and 15, is that we need to really model digital health and digital literacy, and that most of what kids are doing online is actually good. And it's just the little bits of negative things that we hear that make it really kind of blow it out of proportion and make it seem like every kid is doing awful things online. And I think it was Sean who said something about, maybe it was Nancy, who said something about like following and tracking. I think there's also this piece of like the mom code, which I've told my own kids at home, is that it's okay, you can have some privacy, but I do like, my kids have both used the White Hatter social media, and I've mentioned that to parents in my classroom, and I think it's really good. We want to be able to trust them, we need to teach them, but I also really, really think we cannot put kids in adult situations making adult decisions until they are adults, and we have to coach them, we have to teach them, we have to use programs as teachers like Media Smarts to educate ourselves and to help teach kids in classrooms. It's not going away, so we better embrace it and do our best to be leaders with technology.
I love that message. One of the things that I found, we've now presented to just over 460,000 teens from across Canada and the United States, and we have found that the vast majority of these kids are doing super super cool things online, and we older adults need to start acknowledging that fact, right? Because I think that too many adults and parents believe that our kids are up to all this horrible mischief online. No, they're not. The majority of them are doing super uber cool stuff online, and a small percentage aren't, don't get me wrong, but we have a habit of tarring and feathering that entire generation. It's kind of like policing. You have one bad cop, they're all bad. That's not necessarily true, right? So really love that message. Sean from Vancouver, some final thoughts.
Sure. I think that I like to joke and say, I'm so old. When I was young, we blamed everything on rap music and Marilyn Manson, right? Yeah. So tech can be scary, but there's always something. There's a new emerging technology or something happening culturally that is scary. My message to especially parents would be, find ways that you can share in tech with your children and start at a young age. Don't make tech everything about, life isn't all about tech, but I think this day and age, it's definitely a part of life. And when we see kids on tech and maybe it looks scary, we have to remember that a lot of the time they're hanging out with friends. I mean, that's really what a lot of them are doing. They're connecting with friends, they're connecting with family, they're reading books, they're researching, doing all these really cool things, like you said, Darren. And I think that there are a lot of ways that you can experience tech together with your children. What I'm trying to be mindful of is by the time my daughter is 12, 13, 14 years old and getting onto those social media platforms, that she's going to know how to be empathetic, how to behave, how to do things right. So I'm trying to make tech a part of our life now, and but not all of her life, right? So I think it's all about how you incorporate it, and just come to the realization that it's here. So let's find good ways to put it in their life in a positive way.
Yeah, if you think you're old, then I'm ancient, right? But it's kind of interesting when you look at every generation, right? Like in the 1940s, it was comic books were going to ruin the moral fabric of our kids, and then all of a sudden in the 60s, it was Elvis Presley and the Beatles were going to destroy the moral fabric, and then today it's cell phones. But I would argue with you, if you look at past we're doing pretty good. I mean, look at this panel, and we cover off a lot of different generations, and I think. Maybe some older than others, I get it. But I think the majority of our kids, they're going to be all right, but we parents need to be the digital sheepdogs, right? Like, we need that parental participation and communication. Nancy in Calgary, what are some of your thoughts?
I'm going to echo that exact sentiment. I challenge who may be feeling overwhelmed to reposition and to seek out the resources that you saw on the panel today to feel inspired, informed, and empowered to make better choices, not just for their kids, but how you model your use of technology or not. But go for it, and don't be afraid.
Right on target, right? Let's enlighten and let's not frighten. I know a lot of parents get on, oh, what happens if I push a wrong button? Am I going to blow my computer up? No, you're not going to blow it up, right? But again, get your kids to be the digital Yoda. Kids want to teach parents. But here's what I hear from the kids when I try to teach my parents about this thing called TikTok, but they got no patience. So one of the things I say is, we parents, we adults, we learn very symmetrically, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Here's how kids teach, A, B, Q, M, W, X, Y, right? So if we actually give our kids the patience that they're looking for, it's amazing what we would learn from them. And you know what? Kids want to teach you. Why? Because they want to prove to you they know more than you already. So why not use that to our advantage as a parent and help them teach us, right? Help them mentor us in this area as well. So last person is Matthew, Ontario, Ottawa, right?
Yeah.
Matthew, what do you think?
Well, I just wanted to pick up, on that last point about parents feeling overwhelmed, because I hear that all the time, and I hear it from teachers too when we do teacher training. And I think one of the reasons we feel overwhelmed is because we often view the different things we talked about today as being different things. We treat privacy as being separate from misinformation, as being separate from safety, as being separate from ethics, as being separate from screen time. And they're all part of the same thing. It all comes down to digital literacy. And what we've done particularly for teachers, but for parents as well, is to boil digital literacy essentially down to 5 key concepts, key ideas, and that at any given time, you're teaching these 5 ideas in a way that is appropriate to the kid's age and what they're doing. And I've talked about some of them already. The first one being that digital media are networked, that we're in the middle of an infinite network, that we're also always sending data back, and that we're transmitters, broadcasters, as well as receivers. And from that flows the idea that digital media are shareable, because unlike in traditional media and digital media, copying and sharing is the easiest thing in the world. And so we have to assume that anything we send out there, whether it's something we send consciously like a photo, or whether it's something we send unconsciously like our browsing data, it stays there forever, and it's shareable and persistent. It can be shared with anybody, and it is very hard to get rid of it. And as a result of that, we have to be aware, our third concept, that digital media have unintended audiences, that they might be seen by people that we didn't think would see them now or in the future, but also we may not be the intended audience for what we come across online, because it's so easy to, to follow a hyperlink, to have a video of targeted advertising. We're actually less targeted. Of the watershed, that before 9 o'clock there wasn't going to be anything too offensive on TV because kids might be watching. That's gone. Yeah. And our last two concepts are, first, that digital media experiences are shaped by the tools that we use. So in the same way that with traditional media, the medium is the message, now the tools that we use influence how we use them. So YouTube influences how we use it by recommending things. Netflix too. All of the tools. Snapchat makes us use it in a particular way that's different from how TikTok uses it. And to use these things consciously and critically, we need to understand that architecture. And of course, data privacy is a huge part of that. And finally, the idea through have a real impact. When I watch something on TV, if I get really mad, I can throw something at the TV, but that's about it. But when we're online, we can have a real impact on the world around us, and it can have an impact on us in a way that wasn't possible before. And that is a frightening thing, but it's also a tremendously empowering thing. Because when we see big platforms change how they do business, more often than not, it's not because they get a huge fine. It's because advertisers start complaining. And the reason why advertisers start complaining is because people like you and me complain to the advertisers. They said, my kid saw an inappropriate advertisement on that platform and I don't like it. That's what makes platforms change. That's the power we have. That's the power our kids have, and we need to teach them that.
Wow, great comments. One of the things I like to say is that no matter what your privacy settings, no matter what you're doing online, everything we do is public, permanent, searchable, exploitable, copyable, shareable, and it's probably all for sale. Never forget that rule before you hit that send button. But you know what? I want to thank our panel. Wow. I just unbelievable to listen to the knowledge base that you guys brought forward and the information that you shared. In fact, big tip of my white hat to all of you on the panel. Again, thank you to those who are being watching. This is going to be going on to our YouTube channel as well, so it's there for everybody later on to watch, because I think just watching it live, go back, you're going to learn some more stuff, right, from everybody who was sharing their information. If any of you need to contact any of our guests and some of the resources that they have, we're going to have those links on YouTube, so you can connect with Media Smarts, you can connect with Sean, you can connect with Julia, you can connect with Sandra, you can connect with Nancy, who we've kind of lost for some reason. It must be Calgary. The moons are aligning and kind of aligning there, right? And don't forget, for those people who are watching, every Sunday at 1 o'clock, Brandon and I do a YouTube live event where for 30 minutes where we talk about everything the week before that has taken place in the social media internet world. And it's free. It costs you nothing. It's all about sharing information. And that starts at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every single day. And every one of our past shows are on there as well if you want to go on there and have a look and see what it is that you're doing. So again, I want to thank everybody for attending. Again, big shout out to all the panel today. You guys were amazing. We worked through all the gremlins at the beginning before we went live. We just heard from Nancy, her batteries went on her phone and stuff, so that we've lost her, but she was a great resource. So on behalf of the White Hatter team, Brandon and Candace, who are working behind the scenes right now, all the tech and talking in my ear right now, to each one of you from across this great country of ours, we love social media, as well as everybody here. It's with great power comes even greater responsibility, right? Ben Parker, Spider-Man the movie. Love the quote, and nothing could be more closer to the truth than that statement. So on behalf of the White Hatter team and all our panelists, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. Have a great rest of the weekend, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2019-2020 school year. Bye.